Prometheus Unbound by Percy Shelley. So, if you have followed this channel, you may know that my favorite book of all time is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, wife to Percy Shelley. But her husband Percy is a pretty vaunted literary figure in his own right. And I believe I had read Ozymandias back in college, but beyond that, I really hadn't explored his work really because he was, a poet, and poetry just isn't so much my thing. But I was aware that he had written this, Prometheus Unbound, and that this is more or less considered his magnum opus, the greatest work that he ever produced. So I wanted to read it and see how it measured up against his wife's work. And now, after having done so, I can confidently say, without a shadow of a doubt, that Mary Shelley's literary accomplishments absolutely, totally, utterly, completely dwarfed her husband's, because this right here was some bullshit. But I'm going to get to that. So, we all know the story of Prometheus. He was the Titan who gave to mankind the gift of fire and was subsequently punished for it by Zeus by having to be chained to a rock and having a bird rip out his liver every day, which would then grow back because, he's a Titan. He's practically indestructible. And the story of Prometheus was popularized in Greek antiquity by the play Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus. Now, there was a follow-up play, actually, apparently two follow-up plays. It was the first work of a trilogy, as I'm given to understand it. But the follow-up play, Prometheus Unbound, and the follow-up play to that were both lost, and only a fraction of that work remains. But Percy Shelley stepped in to tell his own version of events in his own rendition of Prometheus Unbound. Now, it should be noted that this resembles the original myth only in a passing capacity. Not only does he mix the Greek and Roman versions of the names of these mythological figures, so it's kind of confused in a way, but also the direction that it goes in is vastly different than the original story was supposed to have gone in. And really, this is just a vehicle for Percy Shelley to Percy Shelley. This is just means for him to put forward his own philosophical and political views. But Prometheus Unbound is a closet drama. And if you don't know what a closet drama is, that means a play that was written with no intent of ever being staged. Rather, this work was meant to be performed among its readers in intimate settings. Now, the play follows the sufferings of Prometheus and his eventual release and the eventual downfall of Zeus, or in this version called Jupiter. Again, it's kind of confused because Prometheus is the Greek name for that figure, but Jupiter is the Romanized version of Zeus, so it's just kind of arbitrary, but whatever. Anyway, Prometheus is chained to a rock, and he is suffering big time, but he's actually not mad about that, and he's actually kind of at peace with things regarding his situation, and all anger and resentment towards Jupiter has fled. He is content in being master of only himself, even if himself is, restricted and confined. And then some things happen, and I'm not even going to pretend that I understood everything in this play, because the action of the work gets swallowed up in the endless monologuing. But some things happen, and then there's this thing called the Demogorgon, which is like the son of Jupiter and Thetis. Again, it just kind of bulldozes over the actual mythology which it's drawing from. And then in the end, the Demogorgon drags Jupiter from Mount Olympus down to the underworld, and his reign is overthrown, and Prometheus is freed from his bondage, and then love and knowledge spread across the world, and mankind lives in a perfect anarchist utopia. And that's pretty much the plot. It's very thin. It's not even 100 pages long, and a lot happens, but yet very little seems to happen. Like there's a lot of events that are implied that happen off stage, so to speak, but just what's portrayed in here, precious little actually happens. But let's break down what this work actually is, because even though this is based on Greek mythology, it is not Greek mythology, which Percy Shelley is really playing with here so much as it is Christian mythology. You see, Prometheus in this work is basically Percy Shelley's version of Satan from John Milton's Paradise Lost. Now, John Milton's Paradise Lost has an interesting legacy, especially among the later Romantic poets such as William Blake and Percy Shelley, because they really admired the character of Satan in Paradise Lost, and that's why William Blake said that John Milton was of the devil's party, whether he knew it or not, paraphrasing. But um, they viewed the figure of Satan in that work as the true hero, the bringer of knowledge. And Percy Shelley equates Prometheus with Satan here because both of them are guilty of similar offenses in their respective stories. In Greek mythology, Prometheus gives to humankind the gift of fire, which is a power which apparently Zeus never wanted mankind to have, and he is punished for it. In the Bible, Satan, or the serpent, tempts Eve, and by extension Adam, to eat of the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thereby giving them a knowledge of something which, again, God apparently did not want mankind to have. So Prometheus and Satan have kind of a correlation between them. But Percy Shelley viewed his version of Prometheus in this work to be an improvement on John Milton's Satan, and I would have to disagree. Percy Shelley, in his preface to this, where he explains the purpose of the work and his, sentiments regarding it, he admires the character of Satan in Paradise Lost, but he views him as flawed and kind of ignoble because he is selfish. He is, looking out for his own interests primarily. What he does in that work, in that play, in that poem, he does for himself. He is a very self-centered character. And Prometheus in this is not. He's very selfless. He is basically just a long-suffering martyr who has no real faults to speak of. And that's the problem, because Satan in Paradise Lost, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think that character is the greatest character ever written. That character is so dynamic, so multifaceted. He evokes such varied reactions in the readers that it's just marvelous. And Prometheus doesn't really do that because Percy Shelley apparently missed the point, is that Satan is so dynamic and multifaceted in that work because he is flawed, because he is selfish, because even though he has such noble and laudable qualities, he also is tainted by, pride, hubris, and also greed and his own, ego. That's why the character is so compelling. Prometheus in this is just the suffering martyr who, despite the relentless torment to which he is subjected, feels no animosity towards his tormentor, Jupiter, and that's what Percy Shelley is trying to get forward with this character, because this work has serious revolutionary sentiments in it, because this was written, in a post-French Revolution world where they had seen a revolution that ostensibly had noble purposes descend into savagery and barbarism and just more tyranny, really. And so the purpose of Prometheus in this work is to illustrate a revolutionary who avoids the pitfalls commonly associated with revolution. That is, he is more of a Gandhian pacifistic figure who leads resistance through nonviolence and pacifism. And it's not nearly as compelling as Satan in Paradise Lost, but I understand what he was going for. But Prometheus is not a very rounded or interesting character, although he is somewhat admirable, or more than somewhat admirable, in his espousal of nonviolence and the complete abrogation of hatred and enmity. Because some of the best parts, actually the best parts, the only good parts in this work are whenever Jupiter sends Mercury to Prometheus and he says, "Look, we'll let you go, but um, you have to bow down to Jupiter. You have to submit yourself." And Prometheus is like, "No, I'm not going to do it. I will not sell myself out that way. I will not bow to an authority I do not recognize. But I'm not going to be angry about it. I'm not going to, be violent. I'm not going to harbor any kind of despisal within me for." He says, he basically just says, "Do your works. Do whatever you want to me. I don't care. It's not going to change my mind." And that is a heck of an outlook to have. But this play is really just Percy Shelley's critique of Christianity and established institutions of authority in a broader sense. So Percy Shelley was something of a radical for his time. He was an anarchist, I believe, as was, I think, Mary Shelley's father, William Godwin. And they had serious issues with the monarchy, which I definitely, second that with that. And then they had problems with the church as well as social institutions such as marriage. And this is really just a vehicle for Percy Shelley to put forward his own views on these things. And so, even though Jupiter is ostensibly a Greek Roman mythological figure, he's really just a stand in for the Christian God. And Percy Shelley was expelled, as we know, from Oxford for penning a pamphlet called The Necessity of Atheism. And so he had a serious problem with the Christian religion, and he viewed the Christian God, as William Blake did, as well, as a tyrant who promotes ignorance and trying to keep his own creations in a state of ignorance and deprive them of knowledge. Because that's what the whole point of the Adam and Eve story is that don't eat the fruit that gives you the knowledge of good and evil. And so whereas William Blake in his The Marriage of Heaven and Hell portrayed the Satan character as the champion of knowledge, so too does Percy Shelley in this with Prometheus. Prometheus is the perfect character. He brings knowledge to mankind and he is tortured mercilessly for it, but he harbors no enmity because of it, and he is a completely noble and admirable character, and he is what everyone should, I guess, strive to be. But at the end of this work, whenever Jupiter is overthrown, which is just Percy Shelley saying that we got to get rid of Christianity and dismantle the church. We don't need all that because we can be gods ourselves, basically. And then Jupiter is overthrown at the end of this, and peace, prosperity, knowledge, and love reign on the earth, and mankind lives without class distinction or much distinction of any kind. There are no more slaves and masters. Everybody lives equal, and it's just a perfect little anarchist utopia. And that is probably the most naive crap I have ever heard in my life. And this leads me into why I view this as so drastically inferior to Mary Shelley's work, Frankenstein. So, Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, as well as the founding fathers of America, we must remember that as well, were all products of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period from the late 18th to the early 19th century when there was a boom in scientific advancement as well as industrialization. And new discoveries were being made, and old beliefs and institutions were being questioned, such as religion foremost among them. And a lot of the works of literature from that period, this one right at the forefront, espoused a very rosy view of humanity, that as well as nature as well, and that humans, could be gods themselves, that we don't need religion anymore because it's just holding us back. It was a product of older times, and we're beyond it now because we have science to lead us into the future, and we can create. We don't need a heaven anymore because we can create a heaven here on earth. That's kind of the sentiments of this, at least, and a lot of the shared sentiments around that time period. But the reason why Frankenstein is such an incredible accomplishment is because it was able to look beyond the time period in which it was written. Mary Shelley's worldview was vastly more cynical than her husband's because she had a much rougher life than her husband. There was issues in her family as well. She ended up being rather poor after her husband died, but also they lost a couple kids. She had it a lot rougher than Percy did because she was female in that time period, and that's rough enough. But her outlook on things was decidedly less rosy than her husband's. In fact, if you've ever seen the movie Mary Shelley, it came out in like 2017, I think. It's a movie, kind of a biopic about Mary Shelley. In the scene, whenever she finishes writing Frankenstein, she just plops it down in Percy's lap, and he reads it, and then he runs back in. And he's like, "This was amazing. This was such a great story. But what you need to do is you need to change the ending to where Frankenstein is victorious, and the monster is not the bastardized product of a diseased mind. It's not. It needs to be more optimistic." And in the movie, she's like, "No, you don't get the point. It's because we're not as capable as we think we are." And that's the difference between Frankenstein and this. Mary Shelley knew that humans were not going to be gods. We are far too flawed, direly so. We have more than one Hamartia to our character, and as bright as things appeared in the age of the Enlightenment, the age of reason, she was able to understand that that's an illusion. Things are shit. They're always going to be shit because people aren't perfect. And that's what Percy Shelley apparently could not understand. The level of naivete which is on display at the end of this work is such that even the most ardent of political radicals today would likely not espouse. It is honestly kind of childlike in its utopianism. And it's just kind of goofy because of that. And I think Mary Shelley's Frankenstein has aged like fine wine, and I don't think this has aged nearly as well. I think this is aged like milk. It is not even close to what her book accomplished. But beyond that, I just didn't enjoy reading this in the slightest. I will be the first to admit it's hard to even follow what's happening in this because again the plot, the action just gets swallowed up in the monologuing, and what action happens is largely described through dialogue, and so it just gets overly verbose and wordy, and he just goes on and on describing nature and crap, and it's just honestly kind of unbearable. The entire fourth act of this is just the most tedious thing I think I've ever read. It's largely inscrutable. And then when it ends, it was kind of just a mercy. I thought I just did not like this. I admired certain aspects of it, such as the character of Prometheus. Even though I don't think he's a particularly compelling character, he is an idealized character who is laudable in the way that he behaves, but he's not very interesting. But I can admire some of the ideals of that character. But beyond that, this was just a complete miss. The poetry, I guess it's good. I'm not going to knock it because I don't know enough about poetry really to confidently say whether this is great or bad. I'll say I didn't enjoy reading it. So to rate Prometheus Unbound by Percy Shelley, I'll give this. I don't really know how to rate this, on a technical level, because if you're really into poetry and very flowery, romantic poetry, this is probably the book for you. But if you're not, this is going to just be a slog like it was for me. And Just on my own personal experience, this is probably a D minus. It was not enjoyable. I did kind of like certain aspects of the Prometheus character, but he actually isn't in here as much as you'd think he is. In fact, a lot of what happens in this play just happens without him. And so it just was not enough. It was too thin, too little, and it was just boring, overly wordy, and ultimately kind of naive in its outlook, I think. So to me, this was a swing and a miss. So probably a D minus is what I'd give it. But if you like poetry, really flowery and kind of inscrutable poetry, this might do you. But otherwise, I'm not going to recommend this because this was not really my cup of tea. But anyway, Prometheus Unbound by Percy Shelley. Have you read Prometheus Unbound? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything that I have said about it here today. If you haven't read Prometheus Unbound, like I said, I'm not going to recommend this because I really don't think it's worth it. But um, yeah, as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.